Okay, everyone, welcome back. I took a break to heat up my coffee because my throat hurt, either because I'm talking too much, the AC is on, or the Glade plug-in or whatever it's called. But now I'm going to discuss physical development in infancy. So let's get it popping. So let's discuss cephalocaudal versus proximodistal growth. Cephalocaudal is that you're growing from your head to your tail, so top down kind of thing. Proximodistal is basically near to far. So proximodistal, the growth basically, I can't read my notes. Extremities, like infants control muscles of the trunk before they control their hands. Cephalocaudal is head develops before the trunk, the eyes and brain before the jaw. It's basically like head to tail is the order of development. And what's the average height and weight of a newborn in the United States? The average height and weight is 20 inches and 7.5 pounds. Infants do lose 5 to 7% of their weight in the first few weeks. By the way, the infants' brains are very vulnerable to shaking, and they are actually born with tens of billions of cells. I should say we, right? Because I was a baby once too. What are the different functions of the cerebral cortex? The occipital lobe is for the visual function. Occipital lobe is back here. The temporal lobe is for long processing, and the frontal lobe is for voluntary movement, thinking, personality, intentionality, judgment, decision making, impulse control, inhibition. The parietal lobe is spatial control and somatosensory control, which is touch. Let's talk about lateralization. Lateralization is one hemisphere specializes in one function over the other hemisphere. Examples of the specialized functions of the right and left hemisphere are the left hemisphere is usually specializing in language, grammar, speech, perception, details, motor control. The right part of the brain is usually specializing in controlling the left side of the body, spatial, big picture thinking, pragmatic language, humor, contextual. Let's talk about the basic parts and functions of the neuron. So a neuron is a little cell. Outside of it are these little things that look like roots, and those are called dendrites. Dendrites receive information from other neurons. And then at the bottom, there's like this little thing called an axon. Axons is basically like a freeway, right? Like the information is traveling outside using the axon. A myelin sheath is fat that encapsulates the axon and actually insulates it so that the messages that it's trying to send out actually can be sent faster. And a synapse is little holes in the cell where the neurotransmitter is going to go and like relay the information that that it was carrying from the axon. The two ways that neurons significantly change throughout infancy. Remember, infancy is from birth to 24 months, and that is myelination and connectivity. It's a use it or lose it thing, which is unused connections are replaced and disappear. Those that are used are strengthened. It's like if you're walking down a path, out in nature. If nobody uses the path, like the weeds will grow over it. Like something else will replace it. It's like exactly like that. But the more you use it, the wider and more obvious the path will become. It's the same with our brains and our connections. So what influences do early experiences have on brain development? For example, enriched environments versus less enriched environments. Infants who are growing up in more enriched environments have faster brain development and more brain development than those infants who are born in an environment where they don't have as much stimulation. And you guys, just so you know what that means, that's anything like talking to the baby, playing with the baby hearing words, music, sounds, seeing new things. Everything helps the baby create neural pathways. If you're not talking to the baby, you should explain everything to a baby. The more words it hears, the more neural pathways it'll have for language. Okay, and that is going to affect them in the future. Um, so, what is brain plasticity? And do infants and children recover better and more fully from brain injury? Brain plasticity is basically the brain's ability to change. When you're younger, your brain is the most plastic. It's like crazy, like how plastic it is. As we get older, our brain does become less plastic, but it's still plastic, okay? So infants and kids actually recover a lot faster and more fully from brain injuries than adults. There was this one case where unfortunately, this child was having a lot of seizures, and they had to remove half of his brain. And when he was a kid, throughout the course of his life, the other hemisphere of his brain actually adapted and grew enough neural pathways for him to just have a completely, totally healthy, normal life. But if that had happened to us as adults, our brains wouldn't be as plastic, right? So anyway, let's talk about infancy and sleep. So infants, compared to adults, they sleep way more than us, and their sleep is sporadic. So they are awake usually 1 to 2 times per night, and they're sporadic sleepers up to when they're 6 months old. Oh, thank you for liking my life. They sleep so much because it's thought that REM sleep increases stimulation in the brain, and increased stimulation in the brain increases brain development. So since they're making all these new neural connections, everything's new to them, they need more REM. They're working, okay, while they're sleeping. So infants sleep about 16 to 17 hours a day. They do get more REM sleep than adults. In fact, they start their sleep in REM. And then I think it's after 3 or 4 months, they no longer start their sleep in REM, but they're still sleeping in REM 40% of the time. So yeah. Let's talk about SIDS. Unfortunately, it's sudden infant death syndrome. It's one of the highest causes of death in infants in the U.S. It's the biggest risk will be when the infants are between 2 to 4 months old, and if you want to decrease the risk of that happening, have the baby sleep on their back with a pacifier. Some risk factors are associated with SIDS because we don't actually really know what causes it, but they have found like factors. So these are factors associated with SIDS. Not breastfeeding, the baby had a low birth weight, the baby had exposure to cigarettes or secondhand smoke, the baby sleeping with the parents, the baby sleeping with no fan on, the baby having a heart arrhythmia, the baby having an abnormal brainstem function. The issues that are associated with sleep difficulties later on in life are decreased executive functioning by the time they're 4 years old, language delays, decreased attention regulation, increased behavioral problems, increased emotional regulation problems. Let's talk about nutrition with breastfeeding. So the benefits over bottle feeding for infants and mothers. Nothing tops breastfeeding. It has the perfect formulation and balance of fat and proteins for the baby. It decreases SIDS risks. It's naturally complete. It helps with appropriate weight gain. It decreases the risk of childhood obesity, decreases gastrointestinal issues. It decreases respiratory tract infections. And for the mother, it actually decreases the chances of breast and ovarian cancer as well. It is better than bottle feeding, and it's recommended for the first 6 months of life up to 12 months. There's no time frame that it's recommended a mother should stop breastfeeding, but obviously some people do have to bottle feed for other reasons. But yes, breastfeeding is, the best option. So let's talk about vegetables. What do you guys think the most common vegetable eaten by 15-month-old infants are? I bet you. I bet you won't know because you don't even think of it as a vegetable, like potato. So they're eating fries or chips. So it's not good, right? Let's talk about motor development in infancy. Again, infancy is from when birth to 24 months old. The dynamic systems theory is a theory that says they develop motor skills um, only to only because they're perceiving and wanting to act on something that motivates them. So without them being able to perceive things and then being interested in it, then they're not going to really develop their motor skills, is what this theory um, discusses. Let's see, let's talk about reflexes. Reflexes are automatic reactions to stimuli. They're adaptive responses to the environment, and babies are born with reflexes. Um, there's rooting, which is if something brushes a baby's cheek, reflexively the baby will turn its head in the direction of whatever touches cheek and open its mouth. It's just to help them eat. There's the sucking reflex, which is if the roof of the baby's mouth is touched, it will begin sucking. There's also the Moro reflex, which is a startle reflex. The baby, in order to increase its chances of survival, the baby thinks it's falling. It immediately arches its back, throws its head back, spreads its arms out, and the legs out, which will help it catch someone or hold on to something or whatever, to decrease its chances of falling. And the last reflex that they are born with is the grasping reflex, which is basically that they'll hold on to anything. You'll notice that when you're holding an infant, if the hair touches it, they'll grab it. If anything touches it, they'll grab on. And they have that baby strength, baby grip. Okay? Let's talk about, do reflexes always disappear? No, they don't. Obviously, sneezing is a reflex. Blinking is a reflex. Oh, sorry, I said there were only 4. No. So those 4 that I mentioned, they're the ones that will disappear. Let's talk about gross motor skills. They're large muscle movements like crawling, walking, running, climbing. Children need to learn how to basically engage those skills, and the reason why is because they need to learn what is safe, where is it safe. They need to have that practice and experience to grow those neural pathways in their brain so that they know. Unfortunately, it doesn't transfer over. Let's say you're crawling and you go down this steep hill and you're like, whoops, I'm not doing that again. Well, when they start walking, unfortunately, that experience doesn't transfer. So when they're walking, they again will go down the steep hill until they learn not to do that with the walking. So there are differences in timing of when the gross motor skills occur. There's no sequence. Everybody kind of goes through them around the same time, laying, sitting, crawling, walking, but there's no actual sequence, okay? They're also learning fine motor skills. Fine motor skills are more finely attuned movements, like moving your fingers, grasping toys, a spoon, pushing buttons, stuff like that. So now let's talk about cognitive development in infancy, sensation versus perception. So sensation is their sensing, right? They're using their 5 senses to sense the environment. And perception is what they're interpreting from what they sense. They study perception through visual preference methods, which means that infants, even starting at 2 to 3 weeks old, actually stare at what they prefer. They stare longer at things that they like, things that they prefer. And the things that babies look at for the longest periods of time are what? Faces. Babies like faces. Let's talk about habituation versus dishabituation. So if a baby has seen something, it'll stare at it, right? But then if it sees it again, it might stare at it a little less long. Then if it sees it again, it's oh, it doesn't even care. It's I'm over it. That's called habituation. Disinterest, because it's not new. Habituation is when they're once again showing interest because something is new. So the recovery of that response after changing the stimulation. The baby will start being interested. Let's talk about their vision. They're basically born blind. So they're born with 20 out of 600 vision. That means that something 20 feet away to them looks like it's 6,000 feet away. They don't develop depth perception until later. So they start kind of being able to see color at around 8 weeks old. At 6 months to At 6 months, their vision goes to like 20/40. So something that's 20 feet away looks like it's 40 feet away. And about 1 year old, their vision is approximately like an adult's vision. Visual cliff experiments show that 6 to 12-month olds can distinguish depth. When it comes to hearing, interestingly enough, they start hearing during the last 2 months of pregnancy. Let's see. They prefer high-pitched voices. They're sensitive to human voices in general, but especially high-pitched sounds. There's a study, the Cat in the Hat study, where the mom read Cat in the Hat, and when the baby was born, they preferred that Cat in the Hat story. So they do hear you. They do feel pain. They do respond to touch. And when it comes to smells, they smell different odors. They have preferences. They recognize their mom's scent within their first week of life. And they do have preferences as far as taste. So at birth, they prefer sweet things, but later on in infancy, they start to prefer salty flavors. And Piaget's theory of cognitive developments is that, for example, they have schemas or actions or mental representations that organize knowledge. Assimilation is that they use existing schemas to deal with new information. For example, like if they know what a truck is, everything they see moving on wheels is a truck, right? Or a car probably is what they'll say. Everything cute and little that's an animal, if they think it's a puppy, they'll call it a puppy. Eventually they'll start distinguishing between like bike, not a car, like bunny, not a puppy. Accommodation is adjusting or creating a new schema, which is like for puppies, right? Like now they know that, oh, this is actually a cat. This is actually a bird. This is a bunny. That's accommodation. The sensory motor stage of development is when they understand the world through sensory experiences like sensation, movement, and it happens again from when they're born to 2 years old. Object permanence is that objects exist even if the babies can't see them. So unfortunately, the babies don't realize that. Observational learning is social learning. They observe other people and model other people's behavior starting at 3 days old. And let's see. Types of memory. Implicit memory is memory that you don't have to consciously recollect. Okay, that starts from 2 to 6 months. Explicit memory is memory of facts or experiences, something that you have to consciously access. Like if you're like, oh, what's your address? You're going to be like, you're going to consciously access, your address. Let's see. Infantile amnesia is basically that adults do not remember their life before they were 3 years of age. Joint attention is when people, basically like the baby and the mom, are looking at the same thing. Like the parent points at a tree, the baby looks at the tree. It's a big deal because it requires tracking of someone else's behavior. It requires one person directing another's attention and then reciprocating that interaction. Language development for infants is basically communication is based on a system of symbols, spoken, written, or signed. In infinite generativity means the ability to use a set of finite words and rules. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, if you want to help your child develop language skills as a parent when they're in infancy, you should narrate everything you do. I'm putting away my groceries. Okay, now I'm putting away the oranges, because they need to be in an active environment. No baby talk, so do not speak to babies in baby talk because they'll copy it and it may actually lead to speech impediments or speech disorders. Expand or elaborate on whatever you're doing. Simple and concrete and repetitive. Listen to kids. Be an active conversationalist. Speak slowly. Play games with them. And children do understand language before they can speak. They actually start understanding language at about 5 months old. And that's not weird. It's like you, right? Maybe you don't speak Spanish or French, but you understand way more words. But if you had to speak it, you'd be like, sorry, I don't know. Let's see, what else? Okay. Emotions. Let's talk about socio-emotional development in infancy. Um, Emotions are basically feelings that happen during important times, important interactions. Um, they serve the purpose of helping communicate with others and behavioral organization, which is influencing social responses. Facial expressions are universal. There are, however, display rules, meaning different cultures have different expectations of when, where, how you can show the emotions. Okay, so emotions may be universal, but displaying them is culture dependent. There are 6 primary emotions: anger, fear, surprise, sadness, joy, and disgust. They first begin appearing at around 6 months. Um, Self-conscious emotions are basically emotions that have to do with other people, and they usually begin at the 2nd year of life. So jealousy, empathy, pride, embarrassment, shame, guilt. Reciprocal interactions are parents changing emotional our parents change their emotional response to the infant, and the infant changes their emotional response to the parent. It's like a cycle. Let's see what else. Parents are able to distinguish their baby's cries from other babies' cries, and there are basically three types of cries: the basic cry, which is a hunger cry; the angry cry, like "get my food"; and the third cry, which is pain. Parents should always respond to infants' cries. It's especially important to always be responsive to their cries during their first year of life, because it helps infants develop a sense of trust and secure attachment, which actually will impact them throughout the rest of their life. Smiling is a critical social skill, and it is universal. Let's see. There are 2 types of smiles. One is the reflexive smile, which happens at 1 month old. It can happen when the baby's sleeping. It's not a response to any stimuli. And then there's a social smile. So at 2 months, they start beginning to respond to external stimuli. Let's see. Fear. Fear typically first appears at 6 months, and it peaks at about 18 months. Stranger anxiety is obviously when they're afraid of strangers, and the frequency of that stranger anxiety will depend on if they're in a familiar setting. So like, they'll have decreased stranger anxiety if they're in a familiar setting, if the infant feels secure, if the person is an adult who's smiley, outgoing, nice. They feel more secure around a kid who's a stranger than an adult, right? Obviously, because adults are bigger than kids. Social referencing. Social referencing are when babies look at someone they trust to kind of see like what's going on, what they should be feeling. It's, for example, like if you go to a party with your friend and you're like, you've never been there, she's been there, so you're like, what should we wear? You're kind of going to her to see like what's appropriate. Babies do that too. Unfortunately, if a baby is abused or neglected, it will begin showing fear at 3 months, as early as 3 months. Let's see. Emotional self-regulation are strategies to adjust the intensity and duration of emotional reactions. Coping skills. The first year, they're going to rely on their caregiver, but the 2nd year, they will begin to have self-coping skills like sucking their thumb, self-reassurance. And let's talk about temperament of infants. What is it? It's a person's behavioral style and characteristic way of being, or responding to something. It's how fast you show your emotions, how strong your emotion is, how long it lasts, and how quickly it fades away. Okay, that's your temperament. And there are basically 4 different kinds of temperaments, 3, but then there's like a miscellaneous. There's the unclassified temperament, which 35% of infants fall into, and that's no category fits for the infant, okay? And then there's the easy child, which approximately 40% of infants fall into, and that's, they're generally in a positive mood, they have established routines, they adapt quickly. Then you have the so-called difficult child. Approximately 10% of infants are difficult. They cannot establish daily routines. They have irregular daily routines, erratic behavior, they're slow to accept new experiences, they react negatively and intensely. And then you have the slow to warm child, which it's about 15% of children. They're inactive, mildly reactive to stimuli. They adjust slowly. And the difference, let's see. Infants high on what? Infants high on social responsibility or effortful control will have show to have high social responsibility, academic success, and productivity throughout their lives. If they can delay gratification, like wait for appropriate time or place to do something. It's also been shown that they will have increased popularity. Goodness of fit is really matching the temperament to the environment. So like the environment should match the child. You can't like force a child to be something they're not, but like try to create an environment that is suitable for them. Basic assumptions of the Erikson's stage theory of personality development is that there are 8 social stages of development. They're lifelong, and each stage has a crisis that will result in either a strength or a weakness. First stage is trust versus mistrust. The key crisis here will be, can I trust the people around me? Abuse and neglect and inconsistency will lead to mistrust. And this will all happen during the first year of infancy. The second stage in this theory would be autonomy versus shame and doubt. And this is when the main question is, can I do this myself or do I need someone else? And that's between the years of 1 to 3 years old. Attachment bonds form at around 6 to 7 months. Secure children, when their parent leaves, when the parent returns after having left, secure children will be happy. They'll seek to contact the parent, greet them, or whatever. An insecure avoidant child will avoid the parent or be slow to greet the parent. An insecure anxious child will be clingy and angry when the parent returns. They will show resistant behavior, maybe push, maybe hit the parent, and they cannot be soothed, and they will be crying. A disorganized/disoriented attachment style is when the baby is the parent returns, but the baby seems confused, kind of has contradictory behaviors, overwhelmed, disoriented. Early attachment and forming secure bonds is important because having a secure bond leads to good emotional health, higher self-esteem, higher confidence, higher social competence, with in personal lives, with teachers, counselors, romantic partners. So that is the review of lifespan development so far. I find that class a little bit boring, so I'm going to try to do these lives. I do have a YouTube channel. It's called ADHD TDAH, where I'm posting these lives. As soon as I get 50 or more followers, I'll start doing the lives on there when I study. Thank you for helping me study. I'm going to take my exam now. Bye.